What if the greatest gift this country could give itself on today, July 3rd, the eve of the great quote unquote United States birthday? What if the greatest gift we could give ourselves is to be proactive about human rights, to remember our own power and to use that power to lift others up, to help them get what they need to survive, thrive, love freely? What if we lived in a place where power was not created to use and abuse and extract and protect the corrupt? What if it was used to protect the people? What if it was actually used to create a place where people really do experience peace, safety, and justice for all? Welcome to what is turning into Summer Book Club with Jay Dill, because no surprise, I'm going to nope, I'm going to read to you from this book called Marcia by Tourmaline, which you absolutely have to read. It's really been causing me to think differently about so many things, and today I'm going to share them with you. And I know that you're going to walk away from this episode feeling, more empowered, feeling ready to help others do the same. And in honor of Marcia, because another thing that this episode about is celebrating some of the real heroes of this country who do not get celebrated enough. So in honor of Marcia, I'm wearing some flowers in my hair, just like she did, like she was known for, because I think a huge part of healing this country is telling the stories of the people who fought for everything, who fought for the justice for themselves, for those they love, despite all of the corrupt structures that were working against them. So that's the other thing that this episode is about. It's about, what do we do now that we're waking up to the fact that maybe the systems that are put in place to protect us aren't so protective? Some people, those who have been persecuted for a long time, learned this long ago. And so part of what I'm here to do today is also to encourage the privileged to be brave enough to recognize what those who've been persecuted were forced to understand. And that is that some of the corrupt systems that are in place in this country are there to protect a few at the top who look a certain way, who love a certain way, who have a certain amount of money, not so much for the people. And even if you don't live in the United States, because I know some of my listeners don't, this is for you too. This is for you to reclaim some of your own power in your community and spread that love too. And the part of the book that I'm reading today will hopefully encourage you in whatever fight for justice you're in and whatever battles you might be facing. So stay with me while I read this. This is so fun. I love that I get to have this book club with you. So in Tourmaline's book, she writes that some have sought to undermine Marcia's key role in the Stonewall Rebellion. Historian David Carter speculates that sentiments of anti-sex work, transphobia, racism, and ableism are part of the reason Marcia's contributions inside the Stonewall were erased from initial retellings, including that by Morty Manford, who went on to be a key leader in the movement following Stonewall. Morty may have censored his own recorded accounts, Carter wrote, fearing that to publicly credit a severely mentally ill transvestite prostitute with starting the Stonewall riots and thus indirectly the gay liberation movement could have been used effectively by the movement's opponents. Now, I have to start here because this is really important for you to understand. So, Marsha P. Johnson was a sex worker, right? She did also struggle with some mental illness. Some of the historians who wanted to further the gay rights movement were afraid sometimes to cite her role in the riots and the movements because they were afraid that their opponents would use her mental illness or would use the fact that she engaged in sex work against them to sort of discredit the movement, discredit the argument. How many of us have been afraid to stand up or speak up because our opponents will, quote unquote, fight dirty and use the things that we've been shamed for or judged for against us? I can relate. But what if we deconstruct the meaning of some of this, of sex work, of mental illness? First of all, everyone's mentally ill. Okay? Like, can we just recognize that we do not live in an equal world. We live in a survival of the fittest world. And maybe not the fittest, maybe that's not the correct word. Maybe the correct word is we live in a survival of the privileged world, right? Those who have the proper resources, the accepted skin tone, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of that. Those are the ones who are allowed to survive and thrive. Okay? So let's just acknowledge that we live in what can be a very messed up world. So of course we're going to be mentally ill. Who isn't? And if you go on to read some of the things in this book, and it's not just a trauma dump, okay? So I don't want you to steer clear because you're worried. As somebody who's a very sensitive person, I can handle this book. You can too. It's not just a trauma dump. It's realistically recording the persecution that trans folks endured for a very long time, particularly by the police, the people who were supposed to protect them, and judges, okay, literal judges enforced a lot of this discrimination. So, of course, people are going to be mentally ill when they are sexually harassed and discriminated against on a daily basis by those who are supposed to protect them. But does that mean that their story, their bravery, their heroism should be discounted? Absolutely not. Human beings, even those pushed to the very edge of society, are resilient, are strong, are powerful. And I think it speaks a lot to Marcia's heroism that she was still able to stand up, to love her friends, to be herself, despite the very structures that are supposedly said to protect her constantly attacking her and her friends. So I can understand why some historians would be afraid to share that because of the judgment, but let's be real. Resiliency, heroism does not look like Captain America. It looks like thriving in the mud. It looks like the lotus flower. Marsha P. Johnson is the lotus flower, rising, blooming, despite the mud that she was forced to live in at times. But mud, soil, the ground, that's also where seeds thrive. And she found powerful roots, powerful connections despite everything. Maybe those are the kind of heroes we should look to in this country. And as far as the sex work goes, I'm not going to say too much about it because I'm not familiar with it, but I'm going to say this. Before the existence of laws that protected trans folks in the workplace, and we still don't even have all that we need, what else was she supposed to do to make money when she wasn't allowed to be herself in other workplaces? So before we go judging people for doing sex work, imagine what it would be like to not be able to dress the way that you need to dress, to do your hair, to just be yourself, to use your correct pronouns. What if you weren't allowed to exist in the workplace? The typical, traditional, standard, accepted workplace. What would you do? So that's all I'm going to say about that is that sex work is not a fair judgment. Because, first of all, I think we've also recognized that, a bunch of people in power in this country also have kind of a sketchy history when it comes to their involvement with certain islands and certain billionaires who owned those islands and had connections on those islands. So let's not even go there, okay? Let's just not judge people for things like this. But I also hope that this encourages you. You don't have to look like Captain America to be a hero. Heroes look like Marcia. Heroes look like people who are struggling, who are thriving despite. They shouldn't have had to. Hence the other purpose of this episode, to create a place where we can be proactive about human rights so people don't have to get pushed to the brink of their mental health and well-being. And so people aren't forced, to do certain jobs because they're not allowed in other workplaces. Maybe maybe again, I come back to the gift of what if we actually allowed people to exist, if we were proactive about human rights. And so I'm going to read the next part of this. Disability justice writer Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samarasina, I could be pronouncing that wrong, asked, What would it mean to examine neurodiversity, suicidality, sadness, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder in Johnson, meaning Marcia, and other Stonewall warriors' lives as not just tragic disability and struggle, but also the source of some of their gifts? It is a gift to see the world through Marcia's eyes. In order to change the harshest conditions, to survive in a world not designed for your survival, to believe in your dignity among constant disempowerment, violence, and loss, you have to be able to see beyond what is right in front of you. Instead, you need to see into what is possible, what might have been, what could be, and what will be. Nothing is this or that, um, pink or blue. Like everything is all mixed together. And some of the way that Marcia saw her stories, because part of what this talks about too is that she mixed up dates sometimes, but it's like when you're traumatized and you're living through that trauma, it's gonna happen, and that doesn't mean her story needs to be discredited entirely. In fact, to see Marcia as a hero, one who was able to find joy in her own freedom despite everything, that really is a gift. To see someone who found a way to thrive when everything was working against them, that really is a gift. But let me wrap it up with this. Sometimes Marcia referred to her mixing details in her mind as a tangled computer, so that's the context of this next part. I believe that Marcia's tangled up computer and tangled memory suggests that readers would benefit by looking at Stonewall through a disability justice lens. Peepsna Samar Sina insightfully writes that a riot, this is really important, listen. A riot is not a sane moment. Rather, it is a powerful place of madness. And therefore, the Stonewall Rebellion was as a whole a disability space. We resist ableism when we honor Marcia's incoherence as a powerful way of understanding history. So essentially, what that means is that when people are pushed to the point of needing to riot, okay, where they feel like they have no choice but to turn the weapons that have been used against them on those wielding the weapons, it's not necessarily a sane moment. It's a desperate moment. And there's power in that, right? There's power in, this first part of the book that I read where I talked about, Tourmaline's phraseology of it was like a lit match hitting a pool of gasoline, basically. That's my paraphrase. I blurred my background to help you focus, but now I'm seeing it's kind of messing with my flowers. So if it gets too distracting, I'll change it, but I'm just gonna keep it like this for now. Riots can be moments of power, but I would like to challenge us to create a world where people don't get pushed into madness to just get their equal rights. And here's where this starts, okay? Where this starts is by those who are privileged, right? If you experience any type of privilege when it comes to human rights, based on your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your abilities, anything. If you experience any type of privilege, perhaps be brave enough to recognize that maybe the systems like law enforcement, like our judicial system, court system, maybe be brave enough to recognize that they might not protect in the way that they're meant to. Well, in the way that they're said that they should. What if our systems are not so fair, not so just, not so great? I think we've gotten to a point where maybe we can actually acknowledge that this government that we look to, this judicial system that we look to, was perhaps built to protect a few with certain agendas and not everyone. Again, this is something that folks who've been persecuted for years already knew. The Native Americans who lived here, the the Black people who were forced to come here and then, be slaves and work for free and then have their descendants face countless forms of systemic racism and prejudice. The trans folks like Marcia who were literally just bombarded, who law enforcement forced themselves upon just because, you know, they already know this. But I think it's time the privileged actually recognize it, because this nation will never heal if we continue to ignore, close our eyes to the realities of what our justice system looks like or doesn't look like. I mean, let's get real, okay? A criminal is our president. All right, a criminal who brags about sexually assaulting women is our president, is our leader. I think we have to get real about some of that. I've shared with you that I've had a reoccurring nightmare of an emergency happening, right? There's some sort of sexual predator or dangerous person who's threatening children or threatening me, and I'm trying to call 911 and I can't, or there's a police officer standing right there, but they're doing nothing. And I'm like, come on, hey, come on, And I think, because the cool thing about spirituality is the more that you spend time with your dreams and your nightmares, the more the answers begin to unfold. I think I'm having this recurring nightmare of this happening to show me that we cannot look to the structures that we have for justice anymore. As somebody who has sat in on court hearings for the crime of domestic assault, and who has sat in on court hearings for custody cases, I mean, because I was a part of it, for domestic abuse in the home, the judge is sitting up high. The judge is above everyone else. Why are our courtrooms like that? Why are the judges above everybody else? Who are you? Who actually are you? Someone who is privileged enough to get a certain type of education that puts you in that seat? What if the victims of domestic abuse were the ones in the chairs that were up high? Because if you ask me, it's the victims who should be in that chair. You know why? Because I can tell you from direct experience, I saved the kids, not you, judge. I protected them from the monster, not you. How about for the victims? I'm the one who survived, judge. I'm the one who faced this brutality, this sickness, this cruelty. I survived, not you. Why are you up in the chair? We need to flip everything around. We need to raise up people like Marsha P. Johnson, people like the victims who survive and those who've loved them and protected them, the victims who survive abuse, persecution, the ones who are really out there protecting the kids. Now, I'm going to say this small disclaimer. There are good law enforcement officers out there. I can tell you from direct experience, the one we had on the night of our tragedy related to domestic abuse, I couldn't have asked for better police officers. They protected us. They did everything they could to actually apprehend the perpetrator and not the victims. The police officers did. I can't say, as much for the judge involved, because what the judge did is gave her a very gentle lecture about how what she's doing isn't working. Yes, those were the words that were used to a domestic abuser. You need to find another way to communicate about these kids because what you're doing isn't working. You're fucking right, it's not working, and a gentle lecture is not what's needed here. But thank you for being literally up on your high horse while the victim is sitting down, re-triggering everything so that you can tell the person that what they're doing isn't working. Thank you so much. And I tell this story not because it's just our story, but because it's the story of so many people in this country. What if we started honoring the real heroes? What if we had police officers who were like the ones that came to my home and actually recognized what was really going on and used their power to help the victims, not to make things worse for them? Things need to change. We have to get to a point where people aren't pushed to rioting. So many people judge people for rioting. I mean, as somebody who was 15 minutes away from where all the riots happened after George Floyd, there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of, oh, I got to get out of here. I got to get away from all this. Well, okay, you can because of your privilege. Do you think that the people engaging in these riots woke up and said, you know what, I'm going to set everything on fire? Is it maybe because they're tired of being the ones set on fire? Is that perhaps what it could be? Nobody wakes up and just decides that they want to riot. You get pushed to a point where you use the weapons that have been used on you and you turn them back on your attacker. That's what happened at Stonewall. That's what happens in riots. We need to make a place where people don't get pushed to rioting. Because at the end of the day, like, let's just think about this. What purpose does discrimination against trans folks or anybody really serve? What good does it do the people hating? Nothing, no good. All it does is all that discrimination does is protect the people who are in corrupt positions and give them more power to just continue to serve their own degenerate agendas. That's all it really does. There is no reason to deny anybody their human rights based on their gender expression, their race, their abilities, or the sex they were assigned at birth. There is no reason other than serving some corrupt agendas who benefit for really perverted reasons. Because that's something that's become clear in this country too, is that people who have all this money and power, it's really become rather perverted, hasn't it? So here's what I invite you to do today. I invite you to think differently, because if there's anything that these dreams have taught me, it's that I have to stop looking at the corrupt structures to save me. I have to stop wasting my breath. You should go listen to my Save Your Breath episode. It's right before this one. I have to stop wasting my breath screaming at the corrupt people to change things. They're not going to change things. Change has to come from some other way. It has to come from your creativity. It has to come from your passion, from your power. And how you start is you just listen to yourself. You know a lot more than you think that you know. Take a minute. Ask yourself, what is my relationship with power? Because we all have more than we think. How can I unplug from what I was conditioned to be? Which, if you live in the United States, that's likely a corporate machine who spends a lot of money on what you look like to reach a certain ideal until you're too old, quote unquote, to work anymore. And then you live off of joke of a benefits after giving the country everything you have until you die. Okay. How can we unplug from that and remember who we are? And maybe think, what can I do right now in my community to create a place that's actually safe for everyone so that people don't have to get pushed to the point of rioting just to protect themselves? The best thing I can do to help you is to tell you what I'm doing. Number one, if there's something that you don't understand or you maybe have some bias or prejudice about, read about it. Like, read about, so for example, the reason I read Marcia was partly because Channy spoke so positively of it, but also because I'm like, you know what, I don't know that much about trans rights and the Stonewall riots. I really don't know anything. I've never heard of Marcia Johnson, but somebody who I admire is Channy is talking about how great she is. Well, if the person I admire admires this person, I'm probably going to admire them too. So this change starts by educating yourself, unplugging from the machine and educating yourself. Instead of losing your brain watching Love Island, read a book, read this book about Marcia. Read some of Brene Brown's work. Brene Brown has countless very digestible self-help books that help you kind of detach from some of the conditioning that we have regarding shame and perfectionism. Really, really good place to start. So this change actually starts, you might notice by now, with you healing yourself. Because the more that you focus on healing yourself and unplugging from things, the more you come up with creative ways to help other people. So it starts with you. I'm just going to double check my notes to make sure I've covered everything that I want to cover with you. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to end on this note of be brave enough to recognize the truth. Because what I see in the world around me as a huge part of the problem is people who are not brave enough to learn about folks who are different from them. People who are not brave enough to recognize when that maybe the structures that they've really believed in and held on to so hard might not be who they say they are. They might be corrupt. Because I can tell you all of this, is learned from experience. I used to attend church regularly and cling to Christian teachings. I used to work in public education. I used to believe that, the police would solve everything. But I mean, even from my own experience, I can't tell you how often I've been told, by people, well, I don't really think, like in terms of like when protection orders were violated and things like that by abusers. Well, do you really want me to go arrest him for this? It's probably not his fault. We have a system that too often protects the criminal, protects the one who caused the harm. Be brave enough this 4th of July to recognize that maybe these structures that you're clinging to aren't so much about peace and justice for all, even though they claim to be. Maybe there's something more there. Be brave enough to just recognize that. Change can't happen if people are still clinging to the old ways. It's hard work, but it's absolutely worth it. So like I said, I'm telling you this from experience of somebody who has painfully, detached from some of these structures, but it's absolutely worth it to have your eyes opened and to see what true freedom looks like. And the encouraging part of Marsha's story is that true quote unquote American heroes can look like you. What if the things that you were shamed for could actually be flipped into, look what I survived. Look how I thrived and found myself in spite of. And then what would the world look like if I didn't have to do that? I want to take a moment to thank people like Marsha P. Johnson, who fought for freedom in a country that claimed to be free but wasn't free. I want to thank the Dakota teacher who educated me on the stories of the Dakota people and and the truth about Fort Snelling, where I live, and the Dakota folks who are imprisoned there. I want to thank the Dakota people who are still here telling their stories, despite the quote unquote American attempt to eradicate them. Maybe this 4th of July recognize that we are standing on stolen land. We are standing on land that was taken. That our history is more convoluted than we'd like to believe, but we're here now, and we don't have to repeat it. And not repeating it starts with recognizing the truth. It starts with being brave enough. Just be brave, Look for the truth. Be honest with yourself, because everyone will be better for it when you are. Be honest about corruption. You can't hide your eyes, because eventually it'll be on your doorstep if it's not already. Eventually it will finally affect someone you love if it hasn't already. I remember talking to my friend Nicole Smith Holt about how so many politicians could be so cruel and callous about the cost of insulin when her son literally died because he couldn't afford his insulin because of price gouging big pharma. I said, how can people say things like that? It was after a local hearing. How can people talk like that? Like just you know, call this death, people dying or nearly dying from not affording their medication. How can they just call it a narrative against big pharma? I mean, it is a narrative, it's a true one, but how can they just be so callous? And she told me, she's like, Jenna, unless something impacts people personally, They tend not to care. And that's what we have to change about this country. We have to remember something called empathy towards imagining how we would feel if it happened to us or someone we love, not waiting until tragedy strikes and it does. Imagine the kind of world we could live in if we actually wanted peace, safety, justice, freedom for all. We can do it, okay? There's people fighting for it for a reason because it's possible. We just need the right people in positions of power, and perhaps that person is you. And perhaps it starts with you remembering and maybe even sharing this episode. But in the meantime, shout out to Marsha P. Johnson and all those who fought in spite of. And shout out to you for coming. One of these times, I'll consistently get the click right.